Hey guys, this video is to help you with the classwork assignment. That's your unit review for the test. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to walk you through some of the sample problems just to make sure you're on the right track. Alright, so the first problem, this is from section 1. Problem number 1 from section 1. Well, we're asked to find the secant of negative 120 degrees. Well, we know that the definition of secant is hypotenuse over adjacent. Okay, good. So hypotenuse over adjacent is secant. Well, first of all, secant of negative 120 degrees. Negative 120 degrees means we're going to end up going the other direction. We're going to end up in quadrant 2. No, 1, 2, 3. Quadrant 3. That's going to give us a theta value. If this was 120 degrees, that's going to give us a theta of 60 degrees. So 60 degrees is going to be one of our angles in our special right triangle. The opposite of our 60-degree angle is square root of 3 over 2. Is that going to be positive or negative? It's going to be negative. The adjacent is going to be negative 1/2. Secant, so what's our hypotenuse? Hypotenuse is going to be 1. Secant is hypotenuse over adjacent, because we know that secant is related to cosine. So the secant of negative 120 degrees is the exact same thing as 1 divided by the cosine of negative 120 degrees. So, or we could just use hypotenuse over adjacent. So it's the exact same thing. So hypotenuse is 1 divided by adjacent, which is negative 1/2. So 1 divided by negative 1/2. You keep it, change it, flip it. I'm going to carry this over here just so I can show you better. 1 times negative 2 over 1 is negative 2. And if you see that if you do it as 1 divided by cosine of negative 120, when you find the cosine of negative 120, it's 1 divided by negative 1/2, and you get the exact same answer. Cool. So in section 1, all you're doing is solving using what you know about the 6 trig ratios to solve these 1-step to 2-step problems. Cool. Next section. Station number 2, general angles. So if the point xy is on the unit circle, find each of the following values for the angle theta formed by connecting the origin to this point. Alright, so what is our sine of theta going to equal? Well, our sine value is our what value? Our y value. So our y value is 0.901, and our x value is 0.433. Tangent. What do we know tangent is? Tangent is, the definition of tangent is the sine divided by the cosine. So the sine of pi plus theta divided by the cosine of pi plus theta. So pi is 180 degrees. We're going to add that to our theta. So let's just say that theta is some angle in the first quadrant. Okay? So theta is some angle in the first quadrant. If theta is an angle in the first quadrant, when we add 180 degrees, it's going to take us to the third quadrant. So that's plus pi. So then we're going to say, okay, well, what would my sine value be in my new triangle? My sine value would now be negative, so that'd be negative 0.901 divided by the cosine. Is the cosine going to be positive or negative? Well, it's going to the left of the x-axis, so it's going to be negative. Negative 0.433. So negative divided by negative is going to give us a positive. So 0.901 divided by 0.433. If you evaluate that on your calculator, that is the answer. That you'll get the correct answer. But you should be able to walk through these steps. I highly suggest for these types of problems, whenever you see a pi value or whenever you see 2 pi or any type of radian or anything that's different from, or anything that you're changing in terms of adding or subtracting from theta, that is what you're going to add or subtract from your theta value. Just plug in some numbers. So plug in some numbers for theta and just say, okay, well, theta is an angle in the first quadrant. Well, what if theta was, 30 degrees? Okay. Well, if I subtract 180 degrees, so if I say 30 degrees, this is just a hypothetical example. I'm not working the next problem. This is just 30 degrees minus. So let's just say I said find the sine of theta minus pi, right? First thing you have to do is you have to say, okay, well, what quadrant am I going to be in? Well, if I say, okay, well, theta is an angle, let's just say in the first quadrant, it has to be in the first quadrant. If I subtract pi is 180 degrees, so minus 180 degrees, that's going to leave me with a sine of a negative 150 degrees. Sine of negative 150 degrees, that's going to land me in the third quadrant. What's my sine value here? Negative. So it's going to be what? So sine of theta minus pi is going to equal negative 0.901. That's just an example. Okay, so moving on to the next section. Next section is on inverse trigonometric ratios. So inverse trig ratios is the next section. First problem says find the inverse cosine of negative square root of 2 over 2. Well, what question are you trying to ask yourself every time you see an inverse problem? Well, every time you see an inverse problem, you have to ask yourself the question, for what angle theta is the cosine, because we're looking for the inverse cosine, so we're saying for what angle theta is the cosine function, so the cosine of theta is going to be equal to negative square root of 2 over 2. So we're looking for the angle theta, right? So if we're looking for the angle theta, you have first thing you have to do, you have to ask yourself, in what quadrants is my inverse cosine function a function? Quadrants 1 and quadrant 2. So quadrant 1 and quadrant 2, the inverse cosine is actually a function. We know this from our graphing lesson, graphing of inverse functions. So where is the cosine function going to be negative? Well, not quadrant 1, because all are positive in quadrant 1. But quadrant 2 is where the cosine function is going to be negative. So we're going to say in quadrant 2 is where we're going to be. The second thing that we do is we always create a special just a triangle. Okay, well, or why did I say triangle? Yeah, triangle. Why am I thinking rectangles? Okay, second quadrant. Here we go. Let's make it happen. So if we're in the second quadrant, we're looking for some angle theta that has to be greater than pi over 2, right? Because this is from 0 to pi over 2, so it has to be greater than pi over 2. We know, so if cosine of theta is equal to negative square root of 2 over 2, well, we know that our x value is going to be negative square root of 2 over 2. This is our angle. So do we have any special right triangles that we can use? Yes. We can use the 45, 45, 90 that you know. So this has to be 45 degrees. Well, if this is 45 degrees, what does my theta value have to be? My theta value is from my reference point all the way to where the hypotenuse of my triangle will be. That is my theta value. So what is my theta value going to be? It's going to be 180 degrees minus 45 degrees, which is going to be 135 degrees. Do I like degrees? Yes. But do I love? What do I love? I love radians. So 135 degrees converted to radians. So put 180 on the bottom, multiply by pi. That gives you 135 pi divided by 180. If you simplify that, 45 can go into each of those. That's 3 pi over 4. That's your theta value, 3 pi over 4. So anytime we have an inverse problem, even if it's at arc cosine, so just to review, arc cosine is the same thing as the inverse cosine. So the arc cosine of something is the same thing as the inverse cosine of something. Okay? So that's the exact same thing, just to review terminology. Alright. So what if we had a little bit more of a difficult problem? If we had the tangent of this inverse sine of square root of 3 over 2. All we're going to do is you're going to work the inside first. Whatever you get on the inside, then you're going to take the outside function and perform it. So let's do that. So the inverse sine of square root of 3 over 2. So the inverse sine of square root of 3 over 2. What do I have to do? We're going to work the inside first. What question am I asking myself? For what angle theta does the sine of theta equal to the square root of 3 over 2? For what angle theta does the sine of theta equal to square root of 3 over 2? Okay, so for what angle theta? So then we have the first thing we have to do, ask ourselves, where is the inverse sine function a function? In what quadrants? Quadrant number 1 and quadrant 4. Where is the sine positive? Not in quadrant 4, but only in quadrant 1. For those two quadrants. Okay. Next thing we have to do is draw our triangle. Quadrant 4. No, we said we're going to be in quadrant 1, so we have to draw it in quadrant 1. Okay, so the inverse sine of square root of 3 over 2. We know that our theta value has to be right there. Sine means opposite over hypotenuse. So square root of 3 over 2, right? Hypotenuse we know is 1. We have a 30, 60, 90 triangle. 30, 60, 90 triangle. It's a little bit of a glare. I don't know if that's better. I'll write it on this side just so you guys can see it. Looks like a glare. So I'm going to create a triangle. Yeah, it's better. This is our theta. We know opposite is square root of 3 over 2. Then we have to say, okay, we do know a 30, 60, 90 triangle has the opposite of square root of 3 over 2. So what does that theta value have to equal to? Theta has to equal 60 degrees. Well, what is that in radians? That's pi over 3 radians. Are we done? No. We just did the inside of our function. Now we have to do the outside. So now I have to find the tangent of pi over 3. All I did was I brought my entire function down, and I said, okay, well, I already solved the inside portion. And the inside portion, my answer of the inverse sine of square root of 3 over 2 I got was 60 degrees, or pi over 3. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the tangent of pi over 3. So when I take the tangent of pi over 3, this is what I get. Let's see, pi over 3. Well, we already drew our triangle, right? We said theta was pi over 3. So theta is equal to pi over 3. Let's check it out. So what's the tangent of pi over 3? Tangent means sine of pi over 3 divided by the cosine of pi over 3. So what's the sine of pi over 3? Square root of 3 over 2. So square root of 3 over 2 divided by, you know that the adjacent side has to be 1/2, divided by 1/2. So I'm going to do the math right here. Well, you can't see that with the glare. I'm going to do it right here. You can see that. Okay. So we got square root of 3 over 2 divided by 1/2. Keep it, change it, flip it. That's square root of 3 over 2 times 2 over 1 gives us a square root of 3. That's your answer. So all you have to do are these steps. Make sure you break it down. Do the inside first, and then do the outside. The next video will continue with section number 4. See ya.